but we're going to leave a little bit of time for people who are still waiting to join us. So thank you for being on time, and we'll be with you shortly. Okay, so it looks like we're staying steady at our current amount of people, and we'd like to get started. First of all, thank you guys so much for joining on this beautiful Thursday morning. We want to start by saying that, you know, we really assume that everyone here that's joined us today values collaboration and human connection. So we believe that your input in the chat, and more so hearing your voice today, which hasn't been an option in other presentations, we believe that that's really important, and it's going to enhance the next hour or so for us all. We'd like to model, you know, our virtual collaboration with you all, and we would love to have that mirrored back when the time comes. So please don't hesitate to take yourself off mute or participate in the chat when it's possible. We know that everyone might not be ready for their close-up on video, so you don't have to put your video on, but feel free to take yourself off mute whenever you feel the need to contribute. Okay, so I think we're going to start off with some introductions and an agenda first. So Jody, we can go over this first.
Yeah, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. So just to give a rough overview of some of the things we'll be covering, we'll do some introductions, give a little more background on Doug and myself and the work that we do, for context of why we want to talk about this, you know, why it's important to collaborate, what's been said, talk about some of the research on this topic, and then really talk about what's happening in real time. What are the barriers that are coming up, and what are some strategies that we can put into our work in order to overcome those. And a lot of this is going to be having opportunities for discussion and putting this into through case examples as well. To give a couple notes, we both work in child services, so we work with children and families, and so this will be from that lens, but we feel that it definitely translates to adult populations and any population, so we believe this topic will be relevant to everyone. And then I also want to make a note that, as I said, this is time for us to collaborate together, so while we have information to provide you, we are also really facilitating some conversation around this topic so that we can hear from multiple perspectives in order to problem solve and think through how we can increase collaboration in order to provide better services and meet the needs of the clients we're working with. So as I said, to start with some introductions, we also want to hear from you. So if you mind putting in the chat your name, where you work, and what type of organization, and who you collaborate with. I think this will be important for our conversation to understand who we're already talking with, what systems, what providers that we are working with in doing the work that we're doing. So we'll give a minute for people to chime in there. Yeah, we have some people introducing themselves in the chat and also making a note of what organizations you're already collaborating with or you would collaborate with most often to get an idea.
Okay, so Lucy chimes in, and she's a family advocate that works in a domestic violence agency. Thank you. I'm seeing mediation and restorative practices for domestic violence services. Thank you. Local victim service, DAs. I'm assuming there's going to be a lot of people that collaborate with DAs today, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Oh, we have a Philly person, Jamila. Collaborate with law enforcement and child protective services. Okay. I'm seeing that Gerald collaborates with other professionals across the state. He's a victims advocate. Okay, great. I'm seeing a lot of advocates here, which is great, and I know that that job title requires a ton of collaboration. Survivors of DV. Okay. Other victim service providers, legal services, law enforcement. Well, thank you all so much. We really appreciate that. It gives us an idea of who we're speaking with today and what kind of collaboration you'll be doing. So that's very helpful to get to know you guys a little bit. Feel free to look through your fellow participants and what they do. And so now we're going to move on to a little bit about us and what we do, so you guys have an idea where we're coming from. So first we'll start with Jody.
So I am Jody. I work with the Violence Intervention Program through Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. We provide case management support and also therapy with youth who have been violently injured, whether that's an assault-related injury or recently in the past year or so, an increased number of youth who have experienced a victim of gun violence. Our services are client-centered, family-focused, and trauma-informed intervention services. And to give a little bit more background about the population on the next slide, our youth are 8 to 18 years old. Most of them are in West and Southwest Philadelphia, which is around where our hospital is located. Average age is 14, 82% African American, both male and female equal numbers. And most of the entries that we're working with are happening in and around school. When they are in school, obviously we saw a decrease in that while virtual learning was happening, and we saw an increase in victims of gun violence, as I mentioned. So to give you some background of the work that I'm doing, I'm here today, and like that.
Great. So I work at Hull Mercer, which is the community mental health branch of Penn Medicine or Pennsylvania Hospital here in Philly. And we provide in-home therapy. We're part of the statewide system of family-based care, which is very extensive. We provide in-home therapy and case management, as well as psychiatry, to traumatized victims and at-risk families in Philadelphia. And we really take this go-anywhere approach to working with our clients. We do TFCBT with children, and we also collaborate with adult trauma providers for caregivers. We do trauma-informed case management and connecting with resources like many of you do. And of course, we empower caregivers through advocacy. I will say that in Jody and I's line of work, the client comes to us in the form of a child in need, but often we spend more than half of our time working with the adults in their lives to stabilize an entire family system or an entire parental substructure, as we would call it. So yeah, we really get into advocating for a lot of adults as well. These are kids all over Philadelphia from the ages of 5 to 19. And we have all kinds of specialized referrals as well. Most of them are trauma, but we have a Spanish-speaking team, juvenile justice team, as well as an anxiety team. So here's a little bit about the things that we try to accomplish, and I think you'll probably see some common goals that we work with. You want to add to that, Jody?
Yeah, and this is just to show of, at least in the work we're doing, and I assume a lot of the work that you're doing, that there's multiple different systems involved. We're working with schools, we're working with legal supports, we're working with different housing agencies. So just to show how important collaboration is when you have so many different needs coming up with multiple families and being able to meet those needs.
Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit more about why we would like to collaborate.
And we want to hear from you all as well. So feel free, if you feel comfortable, unmuting or chiming in the chat of just what comes to mind of why this is important, why it's needed.
Of course, yeah, we want to share our resources, definitely. We know that there's so much going on in a lot of these cases that we will need to share some of the other things that come up for us so that the client can have best care. Well, it takes a village. I love that. And we're sharing information to reduce repeated trauma to victims. So true. That's a really great outcomes goal, is that we don't want our clients to be re-traumatized. Sometimes that involves just allowing them not to tell their story over and over again to other people, telling them as much as possible. Yeah, one person cannot do it all. We can't navigate everything. We want to coordinate care for the victim and ensure accountability for the offender. Yeah, absolutely. These are all great. And I want to continue to encourage you guys to come off mute. We want to hear your voices as well.
Yeah, I'll add in avoiding duplication of services. I know that I've worked with families and found out once I talked to different providers that multiple referrals for the same service have been made, which our families don't need 4 different therapy referrals. They need the one appropriate therapy referral, and being able to navigate that once you bring all the players together.
So true, and that reminds me of kind of a service gap that can happen, which I think we'll talk about as well. All right, great. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate that feedback.
All right, so what's the problem that we're hoping to address through collaboration? We see issues with access, engagement, with treatment responsivity, and cumulative stress. That's for both clients, for providers, as well as systems. And so that can be, right, as we mentioned, treatment gap of wait lists, or lack of communication in getting treatment, and getting families engaged in the treatment, or for various reasons, them dropping out of treatment while they start engagement. Really wanting the interventions to be flexible to respond to these complex needs of the clients and youth that we're working with. And our hope is that by increasing collaboration together and being able to communicate, like you said, share resources, share information, that we can help overcome some of these problems that are coming up. And we'll get more into what exactly that looks like and the skills that we can use in order to do that. I don't think that we know what's at stake here, right? We're all working with families, with clients, with victims, in order to provide services, because we care about helping people and wanting to keep survivors in healthy trajectories, whether that's reducing risk of re-traumatization, of re-victimization, of re-hospitalization, health effects, risky behaviors that can create additional issues for clients and families. Right, there's a lot at stake here to help put interventions in place so that we can improve the outcomes of the youth and clients that we work with.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about things that have been done and some research around what happens when people collaborate or don't collaborate. So here's a study where there's collaborative care and intervention in targeting violence risk behaviors, and this is a lot of what Jody does. And what this study did is that the population was adolescents 12 to 18 that presented to a trauma center with violence-related injuries over the course of 1 year. And what they did is the treatment condition, they received medical follow-ups with a social worker and a nurse practitioner and a therapist, in which they did this for an entire year. They had motivational interview and CBT interventions, and all those people working together and all the appointments worked great. And the control condition, they just got the standard of medical attention at presentation, and then they got some primary care follow-ups for their injuries. And what we found is that the adolescents that have been exposed to community violence were 3 times less likely to do things that re-traumatize them, like we talked about. Those things would be like carrying a weapon or using drugs. And it's all because of the collaborative care that they were offered. And we like to think that there's a connection made in this study between collaboration and re-traumatization, or decrease re-traumatization. And so next, we can talk about another health community clinic. In this health community clinic, there were 400 adults that tested positive or screened positive for PTSD. And so they had a control group that just gave them a trauma brochure, and they also gave them some psychoed and a trauma-informed psychiatrist. So medication, psychoactive medication. And then there was experimental group who went a step beyond, and they gave a case management and more trauma-informed services. And what they found is that even doing the minimum here, just providing a little bit of trauma psychoeducation and connecting them to medication, both groups improved. Of course, the one with the case management improved a little bit more. And they believe that the reason it wasn't more effective is because the case management wasn't mobile. So going out to people where they are seems to be an important part of collaboration here too. And so then we have another study. This is a little bit more child focused, but this study looked at social workers and teachers who had regular contact, so a very common collaboration in the family services world. And they found themes that came through all of these interviews. The first one is solution-focused work. Most people reported that clients had better outcomes when the team got together and they formed an individualized plan where they looked for solutions. Right? This client doesn't have housing. This kid can't exist in the classroom setting because he's too unstable. What's the solution? Another thing they did is listen to the child, or in our case, listen to our clients, right? Like, we want to make sure that they have buy-in and we're doing what they're asking us to do as much as we possibly can. And then there was team collaboration with external contacts, the more the better. And also collaboration for school attendance or just attendance to meetings in general. We know that half the battle is getting our clients to show up for the things that will help them most sometimes. So those were all themes that came out from this research as well. And so now we're going to talk about trauma-informed collaboration. What's different than just regular collaboration? What's different in our field when it comes to collaborating with others?
Yeah, and to give a little background, I think we want to do a quick review of context in order to inform that. So when it means to use a trauma-informed lens, hopefully we do that for our clients and are able to translate some of the skills that we use in our interaction with providers as well. So for a quick review, we have here the 6 key principles from the Samson model of trauma-informed care. But we want to hear from you as well if one of these principles speaks to you, or if you have your own definition or summary of trauma-informed care. What does it mean to you? Either feel free to unmute or put it in the chat. Anyone feeling brave today to unmute and chime in?
Empowerment is a great point. Yeah, and as far as unmuting goes, you could always just unmute, say your name. Hey, it's Letty. Hey, it's Lucy. Not to call you guys out, but those are just 2 people I saw collaborating and contributing. Yeah, I see some agreement in the things that are going on here. Empowerment. What does trauma-informed care mean to you guys? Like in your experience, what has helped the most in being trauma-informed? Cultural, historical, and gender issues. Yeah, that contextual background is so important for our clients and knowing exactly where they're coming from in those contexts. I agree.
Yeah,
The one big question that we always hear when we think of trauma-informed care is not thinking, you know, what is wrong with someone? What is wrong with this person? Why are they giving me so much difficulty? And more so, what has happened to this person? Because when we think about what has happened, like it really focuses us on the trauma recovery more so than some of the barriers that we're getting. Lucy, I really appreciate your efforts to unmute. I understand it's not possible for everyone. Thank you very much. Oh, yes. Assuming everyone has some kind of trauma. And we're on the same page. I appreciate that, Lucy. Okay.
All right. And then also within that, thinking about the complexity of trauma, you know, we recognize the different symptoms. These are a list of multiple symptoms that can be going on. It looks different for everyone, right? Different things can be going on and how you're responding, how you're reacting to different situations, what you're dealing with at any moment in time. And thinking about this is going on for the clients that we're often working with, but also at times and probably often for ourselves as provider and the different providers we're working with. So keeping that in mind too, that it's not just the people that we're working with who are experiencing the complexity of trauma, but also the people that we're working with as we're collaborating.
Absolutely. I want to shout out Ashley. She gave some great points about trauma-informed care as well, of understanding that most of our clients are assuming that everyone has had intersectionality with oppression and power and control. So I really appreciate that as well, Ashley. And so now we want to hear from you more. What are some barriers to collaboration that you have experienced in your work? Those things that are just so frustrating.
Yeah, what gets in the way?
I know that Letty and Gerald, I know, and Erica, they're all just typing away right now. Yep, there's lack of funding, so true. So true, and available resource accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, okay, so it looks like we're having technical problems with mute, so we're just gonna continue to contribute in the chat. Thank you guys for letting us know that. But great comments here. Lack of appropriate resources, I'm seeing a theme there for sure. And agencies equipped to handle trauma-informed care. So true. We're going to get into that actually, like trauma-informed care at the agency level and what an overwhelmed organization looks like and how it's tough to work with. So we appreciate that. And we have a few more. Oh, lack of trust. Oof,
Yep.
That's key, Gerald, especially, I know, especially in the justice system when there's two sides that don't trust each other, or sometimes people not trusting their own side.
Right, or just history of relationships and that coming into current relationships.
Very true. Oh, turnover, not being able to fill open positions. Qualified staff, I've been there. Andrea, thank you. Okay, so Jody's going to talk a little bit about some of the barriers that we see as well.
Yeah, so I think, do we have all of our pictures coming up here? Yeah, so a lot of these were mentioned. The ones we had in mind as well is that lack of trust that was mentioned, lack of resources, having just too many things on your to-do list to do, that making that phone call or that email seems like it's going to send you over the edge, lack of trauma-informed care within agencies, miscommunication, as we said, like we're all going through our own stress and trauma experiences, so that feeling on empty, feeling burnt out, and struggling to be able to do kind of the day-to-day to the work sometimes. And also at times the barrier of insurance. I know those who are fee for service, you can't always bill for the time it takes to do phone calls with other providers. And so how do we still include that in the work that we do?
Absolutely. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about systems now, because systems are a huge barrier. And Gerald's chiming in saying that the lack of continuity bleeds into the lack of trust between agencies. So true. Players that you trust, they're not always there, and it creates a trust vacuum. Wow, I love that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how we can begin to address that, because some of these things we cannot control, right? Like, we are working with systems that are overwhelmed. Sometimes they lend themselves to re-traumatization, and it can be tough working within them. But I also want to point out here that individuals, that peer-to-peer connection, it actually has the ability to cut through the barriers and cut through some of these things that happen. While it can be extremely difficult for all of the reasons we just mentioned, we know that one good connection between two professionals that are working for a common goal or the same client, that can provide amazing outcomes and that much more positive trajectory that we want to see for all of our clients. So, even though that peer-to-peer collaboration is also often blocked through these barriers, we want to talk about reasons that it doesn't always have to be that way. And if we take certain extra steps or certain very tactful strategies, that we can enhance our chances, I'll say, of making that connection that can help our client. Okay. And so here I just want to share a story about collaboration and how things turned out. So I just kind of changed the story last minute by seeing the room. And I want to share a story about a young girl that I was working with. It was a 14-year-old girl, and she was a victim of rape. And I was working with her and her family. The accused perpetrator was mother's boyfriend, and trauma work was difficult. She was having a really hard time. She was going through every emotion you could imagine. And a pre-trial hearing was coming up, which some of you know about. And I was playing phone tag with the assistant DA for probably like a week and a half, 2 weeks leading up to this pre-trial hearing. This girl was petrified. She knew that the alleged her perpetrator was going to be there, and she didn't know. She was thinking about not going. She was thinking about all this stuff. And we came up with this plan, like, you can have your mom. Your mom will be there. She will be a huge support with her, and that helps. And I wasn't able to get in touch with this assistant DA. And it was the night before, and I had a long day, and I was like, she's probably not gonna be at work. She's probably not gonna pick up. Like, I don't have the energy. But I put in the call to this assistant DA, and she picked up at 6:45 on a Wednesday. And she was able to tell me in that phone call that mother would not be allowed in the meeting. So this young girl was gonna have to testify all by herself and tell her story. And it wasn't even the trial yet. It was pre-trial hearing. She was gonna have to point out her perpetrator, and I knew this would be really tough. But knowing this ahead of time, having that one piece of information allowed me to work with the client. We came up with coping skills. We came up with things that she could do in the moment. She can take water, and I worked out with the assistant TA that I could be standing in the back of the courtroom. So that little extra effort, although it's just my job, it's just what we're supposed to do. In this case, it helped this client get to the point where justice could be served and she could go forward with her trauma recovery. So I wanted to share that story, and it turned out to be a success, and it's just a small example of collaboration. Did we want to give examples here, Jody?
I think we were going to see if others had examples or comments, things they wanted to add in, maybe of a similar situation where just a brief interaction or collaboration was able to kind of change the course and provide information that was able to better engage with the family or help support a better outcome. We would love to hear more positive stories.
So we're just going to allow a little bit of time for people to contribute. It might be hard to type out a story as well. One thing we could do is also go on to the next, and if somebody has a story, we'd love to kind of shout you out at some point as well.
We do have one thing in the chat of, yeah, Monica saying there's a lack of real understanding that all of us as humans have trauma responses, and that sustainable practice does really require a true understanding and application of trauma-informed principles. It has to start with providers, or we can't truly serve one another or our clients. Lots of examples of good stories when these principles are understood. Love that. And definitely agree of, yep, being able to interact with each other with that trauma-informed lens and principles in order to serve our families and clients that we're working with. And Sarah gave an example of working with several people, a local hospital, to get a victim reimbursed for a rape exam she was charged for. It saved her lots of time and frustration. Yep, so taking that time to talk with people and other providers can be a huge relief to our clients and help them out during very stressful times. Gerald said, collaboration with other professionals has definitely increased the safety of dozens, if not hundreds of my clients, and just as importantly, reinforces for me that I am, I assume I am not alone in doing this, which we all came to feel sometimes. Come to feel sometimes, allowing me to continue to do this. Yes, that's great. Definitely. I'm sure it's increased the safety of many, many clients. Yes, thank you. Love all these examples of hearing about collaboration and hearing how it's benefited us as providers as well as the clients that we're working with.
Okay, so we can go on to talk about how collaboration is key for us. A lot of these things that you guys have mentioned already is that the reality is working with these people who need us most, it's just not easy. And that is an understatement, as we can see here. We know that people that are traumatized, there are some counterintuitive responses that can be very difficult, confusing, and even sometimes straight up bizarre in dealing with. And our reactions to all of this trauma and collaboration, it's key. We need to remain empathetic, with each other, even when it seems like our clients are making our lives difficult, or other people in our field are really causing barriers for us.
All right, so I think we've definitely covered of why it's important and how it can help. We want to get into some of those action steps, some of those tips that we can take away and hopefully implement into our work to increase collaboration moving forward. I want to take some time to talk about language and the language we use, the mindset we use and the framework we use in the language when we're talking about clients and with other providers. And thinking about using this trauma lens, just the way that we do often interactions with clients and how we translate that into how we interact with other providers. Often when we talk with clients, we want to focus on problems, not people, right? We avoid blame and judgment. We focus on the problem, whether that's, what happened to you, what was going on for you in this moment versus like, what were you thinking, or externalizing problems to help problem solve issues, like if a client's showing up late, talking about how it might be something going on with insomnia instead of just assuming that a client doesn't want to participate or engage in treatment. So using those same concepts in our interactions with other providers, right? If someone's not responding to us, using the lens that we're not assuming that they don't do their job or they don't care about the client, we're kind of taking away that blame and judgment and just trying to figure out the problem is the lack of communication and what can we do to fix that problem in the situation. And then again, language in our collaboration, that same idea of focusing on solutions, focusing on the problem, not the person in our interactions. I want to talk about this idea of having to versus get to. This is an idea that was brought up to me in just that quick language adjustment of how that can completely shift our mindset and our framework in our conversations of not, instead of I have to go to this meeting, I have to go to this training, I have to go to this collaboration session. What if we just change that idea to I get to collaborate, I get to serve this family, I get to attend this meeting, and what that can do and how our perspective is and how the lens that we're using in our interactions and our communication. And again, wanting to have space to vent at times, but keeping that solution focus, that problem versus that person, focusing on the problem, not the person, so that we avoid client bashing and avoiding creating maybe even a toxic work environment by, bashing clients and people that we're working with or other providers. And then lastly, pausing if there's any questions or points about anything so far. Okay, lastly about language is again, using language that builds our collaboration. We want to build a team and our client is part of the team. So what language are we using to include the members of the team, whether that's other providers, other supports of the client and the client itself, him or herself. We want to recognize trauma is a lot about this feeling of loss of control. And so giving opportunities to have clients have this perceived sense of control, giving them voice and choice, as we mentioned before when we were talking about principles of trauma-informed care, of as much as possible opportunities for clients to have voice and choice in their treatment, in how it's done, and who's involved in that. And once again, right, we focus on the problem, not the person, and using this team environment to collaborate together in order to tackle the problem versus this person isn't doing something, or this person has this issue going on. We're focusing on that issue, not anything related to that judgment and blame on people.
Great. Yeah, and so I just want to talk a little bit more about how the trauma-informed lens extends to professionals and not just clients. And so, I mean, we all know what the buzzwords, right? Secondary trauma. And that's referring to this form of trauma by osmosis, right? This idea of like, if we are around these tragic situations for long enough, then we will also begin to take on some of those tragic situations, some of the symptoms of trauma as well. And let's face it, like we all experience something really tough, everyone in this virtual room, and that's we encounter good people in tragic and terrible situations, and we do that over and over. That's our job, right? And it's bound to affect us, and it's bound to affect the way that we talk to each other and the time that we have for each other. But just as much as we have compassion for a child or a mother or a victim, we have to have that same compassion for each other sometimes, and it can be tough in the rigmarole of our day-to-day life, everything that has to get done. It can be tough to stop and have passion, especially when two sides have competing agendas a lot of times, or another provider might have a different idea than you on what's best. So that can be really tough, but this is just, empathizing with you all that this happens to us, and we should try to find a way to empathize with each other as well. So here are just a couple ways to do that. And that's, with our clients, we try to maintain a positive regard for them at all times. Carl Rogers was big on unconditional positive regard, and he felt it was the agent of change in all therapeutic relationships, right? But how do we have that with each other? I like to say that something happened when we all went remote during the pandemic. And that's something that happened, is that we stopped giving each other the benefit of the doubt, maybe even more so than before. We were all dealing with our own stress, but we didn't have that human-to-human contact. Zoom and email is not the same. And when something went wrong and we were emailing back and forth, I became enraged at times. But it takes a lot to step back and say, you know what, I don't know this person, or I used to know this person, and I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt in this situation, in the effort that the collaboration will be successful. And this can also happen if a client has the same frustration that we have, but with another provider. So if we hear about a client that's upset with a psychiatrist or their lawyer or another therapist that they're working with, right? All of this matters. And how do we deal with that, right? So I'll get into a question about that later. But boundaries that we can have with each other and checking in on each other is something that we can also do. So if we find ourselves needing something from another person in our field, even just at the end of an email, asking, do you have the bandwidth right now to meet this request for my client? And that gives them the opportunity to say, no, I don't. Or it gives them an opportunity to think like, yeah, I can do this one thing if it matters for your client. Do you have the bandwidth to support my client? It's some language I've used before. And if they say, no, this is not, like, we can find a compromise. Can you meet once a month so that we can talk, so this case doesn't get away from us, right? So that we don't miss something important that could help the outcome for our client. And so this is just a few things about collaborating with each other, positive regard, and asking people if they have the bandwidth. And so here are questions that we can check in with ourselves in the moment. If we're experiencing frustration with other people in our field, or people on the other side of the courtroom, or people that just pose a challenge to our daily work. How am I feeling right now? Before we hit the send on that email, before we call a supervisor, although we should sometimes. What does the client need from me right now as far as advocacy goes? And how is this environment affecting the situation? Sometimes I've been in the courtroom, I've been in the waiting room of family court, which is a very tense environment. And like, how is that affecting the way that my client is talking to their lawyer? Or how is that affecting the way that I am teaming with this family right now? And even if it's from our own quarantine, like in the past, like that was a stressful environment too. And then we can determine, how do I best respond? After we consider all those things, sometimes we can be very reactionary, and a lot of things we do.
Great. And so, yes, so I think with this has come up throughout our presentation, but talking about how difficult this work can be and things that are coming up for ourselves. We are humans doing this difficult work and going through our own experiences with trauma, either related to the work or in our personal lives. And so we have to just take a minute to mention compassion fatigue and related terms such as secondary traumatic stress, vicarious trauma, and burnout that can definitely happen when we're doing this work and working intensely and intimately with clients who have experienced such difficult tragedies. So this is just a list of symptoms that go into compassion fatigue and being aware of those symptoms and symptoms related to these, so that we know when we sort of need to intervene to take care of ourselves, is take a step back, to do the self-care we need to do, to talk to our team, to our managers, and implement some supports in place in order to be able to continue doing this work. And recognizing that it's us going through this, and also the various people that we're working with in other agencies and other providers who may also be going through these same symptoms and needing support as well.
Okay, so when does, here we have an example of poor case collaboration, and since we don't have the ability to speak out loud, I don't think people can try.
We are working on kind of some tech solutions. I believe if you put in the chat that you want to unmute, that the hosts can unmute you to speak. So feel free to continue writing things in the chat, but you can also say that you want to unmute, and we may be able to get some other voices besides our own joining in.
Okay, so we have a good case here, and Poor case collaboration, an example, or just when does that happen? And here Monica says, I was working in a local child protective office and a client came in for a visit with her child. She was triggered by the guard, which we've all experienced, and began yelling at everyone, watching this and reacting. They were also triggered, but they did not see this in one another. Instead, they started commenting about the client and how she was acting like an animal. In truth, this was her trauma response, right? The fight or flight. And it seems like Monica was able to speak with a few workers in my immediate surrounding area about this, and the situation was handled poorly with the client directly because no one directly involved applied the TI principles that we need. Harm can be done when this is happening. It's so true, and it's not understood and implemented. I think people do have that reaction, and I think, sometimes other providers' fight reaction is kicked in, right? When we need to be the ones that take a step back, and we need to be the calmest people in the room. And sometimes we need to direct other people to do that as well, like Monica did in this situation. Great example, thank you. I think we already had an example of good case collaboration, so we can go to the next one, Jody.
Yeah, so we talked a lot about language. What are other ideas of how we kind of can adjust our language, whether that's in conversations, in meetings? How can we use language and adjusting that to encourage teamwork, avoid client bashing, client appropriate language? So we talked about the have to versus get to. I would love to hear if other people have ideas or solutions that they do in their own work.
While people are typing, I have an example of client bashing, and people don't realize that we do this sometimes, but sometimes when we communicate to our colleagues or our supervisors, we're so amazed by the way that our clients are acting or the things that they're saying to us that sometimes we'll say them word for word, and then the client said this, right? And I've had situations where some of my staff have begun to do like kind of an impersonation or a caricature of their client, and I like to stop them and say, let's stop here. Do you need to impersonate the client like that in order to get your point across? Or is it better to talk about what you were experiencing in that moment rather than impersonating and trying to get a reaction out of me with describing your client? So sometimes these client bashing situations can be subtle, but it's up to us to be mindful and kind of call them out. But I'm interested in anyone else had any ideas about adjusting language where they said, hey, let's think of it this way, or I think my client would prefer it if we spoke about it that way. Anything like that.
And again, if you're interested in unmuting and having issues, you can put in the chat to unmute, and I think someone will be able to open your mic to be able to chime in. If you did select no at the beginning, you possibly can, in your browser settings, allow the site to access your mic in order to unmute as well. Or keep it going in the chat, whatever works.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm still wondering if anybody has the idea of adjusting language, things that we can do to adjust language in others or ourselves to provide a more effective collaboration here. And I'll assume that some people are typing, and we can also go on to another question as well if we don't have anything here.
I know I can say that I also, especially, we're all doing a million things. And so I try to adjust language when clients may be talking to me about another provider and adjusting that way of if they're complaining about, I'm not getting phone calls, or like this person isn't doing their job, and trying to reframe that. And again, focus on the problem, not the person, and recognizing they may have other things to do. Not everyone can answer their phone, as soon as you call, and helping the client figure out what can we do to create that. Let's call together. Let's, next time we see them, let's talk about this with them about how we can increase that communication instead of kind of going into the provider bashing with the client.
That's very true. And I think we actually already have another example from Monica about how collaboration can reframe our impression. She collaborated really well with the security and the people in the immediate area in order to reframe the impression that they were having of that client in the moment too. So lastly, I really want to hear from you guys. Like, we have some examples, but we are a room rich with information and experience. So I want to hear, how can we improve how we work together and prioritize the connections with other people? Maybe things that we're not doing now, or things that you would like to implement in yourself, something you've already identified, things like that.
All right, we have from Erica, you may learn information from others that could put a reaction or response from an individual into a greater perspective. You may learn to recognize that certain behaviors that may be initially viewed as difficult is actually a trauma response. It can help remind providers that everyone responds to trauma differently and there is no right way to respond to trauma. Yes, definitely a great point. I agree that when we're able to talk together, it can definitely provide additional background information or help switch our perspective. And then we're able to do more solution focused work to address the trauma symptoms and work around them rather than just label a client as difficult or not engaging.
Yeah, that's so true, Jody and Erica. And we have a story real quick from a contributor to this presentation. His name is Josh, and he works with us. And he worked in a child residential. It's a great illustration of not understanding a trauma response. He worked in a child residential, and he had a really difficult day with a kid, really kind of like targeting him as a staff member. And then it came time for bedtime, and the child picked Mr. Josh to be the one that put him to bed, to be the one that like got to calm him down at the end of the day. And he said, "Okay, this is great." And he said, "Josh, I would like the iPad today, or the iPod today. I would like to use it for some calming strategies." And he said, "Great, this is really taking a turn for the better." And the child got the iPod, and he looked at Josh right in the face, and he dropped it in a big glass of water with a straight face. And Josh was like beside himself, and he was like, "How could this happen?" And he talked to some people on the unit, some other staff members, and he said, "Yeah, that kid's a repeat resident of ours, and he experienced all this trauma. And every time there's a new staff member that he sees, he tests them. He tests them to see, are they going to react in anger? Are they going to react aggressively towards me? I'd like to get that out of the way now, so he would trigger staff, as we all know our trauma victims to do at times. But just talking to the people, the other staff members on the unit, gave him better perspective on like why this kid was acting the way he was, and it was because of trauma, of course. Thank you for that story, Erica. Anyone else about how we can improve how we work together?
We have time if there's any questions as well related to the discussion, to other things we talked about. We can take a minute if any questions have come up along the way yet. Yes, Monica, in the chat we have, like you said, Doug, that understanding of what happened to someone versus what's wrong with them is so fundamental. It can help us not to make things personal. Yes, right. That's why this trauma-informed lens of understanding trauma, the various symptoms, the various different reactions and responses that come with a trauma history and experiencing trauma can definitely come into play. And it's very easy to take things personally at times, but switching that mindset to the trauma lens in order to not to. Great, thank you.
All right, so next I believe we're going to put some of what we learned into practice and also a case review.
All right, so we have another case example that we're hoping to go into a little more depth on. So I'm going to give some background on this client that was in our program. I'm going to give you a little bit of information of how beginning of treatment went, and then want to have some questions to pose, and would love to hear from you, again, either in the chat or unmuting, kind of walking through this around the treatment that happened and what could be done moving forward. So this client, he is a 15-year-old male who lives with his grandmother and sister in North Philadelphia. He attends his Philadelphia neighborhood school with an IEP, an individualized education plan. He is currently on probation for retail theft and marijuana possession. He has been recommended for trauma therapy, school supports, and drug and alcohol treatment. He is diagnosed with ADHD and ODD. He has a history of trauma. He's been a victim of multiple physical assaults. He's experienced community violence and experienced both bio parents with mental health diagnoses. So he came to our program as a victim of an assault, and then we see him engaging in some risky behaviors that lead to him being on probation on that side in the legal system. To talk about then how treatment went, he like it says, he was referred to trauma therapy and drug and alcohol treatment. His case manager did have one interaction with the therapist as treatment was starting. He engaged in his trauma therapy, but did not engage in drug and alcohol treatment and did not engage in school. There was no communication with his school and understanding what the issues were there. There was frequent communication with all of the court personnel, so with the probation officer, the public defender, and assistant district attorney in order to navigate the court process. But outside of that, like I said, the interaction with the therapist one time and then not a lot of engagement with the school. So this went on for about 3 months. He was able to successfully discharge from probation, but then a month later he was rearrested and back on probation. So if we go to our questions and thinking about this example, hearing from you all, what do we think went well? Is there anything that was successful or things that went well in those initial interactions with the family?
The thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the question here, and then I'm going to put the information from the previous slide up so people can look and see things that went well. I'm also going to put your background up there, Jody, because you said it verbally, and I want people to...
Yeah, do you want me to type it out?
No, I've got it here.
Okay.
This is just to add to the story of this client for you guys that wasn't on the slide here. So we're wondering kind of like what went well. There's some abbreviations in there, but I think people will get the picture. I think part of knowing successful collaboration is kind of like what good looks like, right? So this is what this question is getting at. Like, what does good look like when we collaborate in an effective manner? Because in order to achieve, doing it effectively, I think we need to have that experience of what a success looks like. Even elements of a tough case that went well. And if it's too much to continue to keep typing, you can always put an unmute in the chat, just like that. I'm going to model it for anybody that wants to try. Any brave souls out there. Just take a minute. I'll give it another 30 seconds.
can put the next question in the chat too. If you maybe nothing went well and there were more mistakes or missed opportunities.
Very true.
Yep, the initial collaboration with the trauma therapist, the case manager was able to provide some background of the involvement in the program, confirmed that he had started treatment, to have that, make sure that was shared back to other providers.
Yeah, I really like that, Marielle, too. Knowing what's going on outside of our realm of control, like, are they seeing their other therapists? Like, can I confirm that he's attending? That's a good point, too. Yeah, and Gerald speaks up and says it was ID'd, like, this kid needs trauma therapy. And I can say that oftentimes it doesn't happen for the people that we work with or the people that we don't work with, right? Like, nobody ever identified them as needing the support that we can offer. So these are great points. And
right, especially, oh, go ahead. I was just saying, especially with youth who may be engaging in risky behaviors or having police involvement, but acknowledging that there is a trauma history and that it's not just about the behaviors, those can be a symptom of trauma.
Yeah, Erica talks about one more plus is that it at least attempts to engage multiple aspects of his life: school, home, mental health. Yeah, so the multiple domains and the ecosystemic model is important to us. And as you guys know, working with families, like, you want access to anybody that they communicate with to see if they can help. So yeah, multiple domains were included. And then Gerald talks about a fail as well, which is limited communication with school.
Yep.
It seemed like no coordination between trauma and drug and alcohol, which seems to be really important. If they're coming to one, what can I do to encourage my client to take the next steps? Can we use some motivational interviewing when he shows up to my session to show up to another appointment that he might need desperately in order to avoid re-traumatization, or in this case, avoid going back on probation or future trials again.
Great.
Okay, so our next question.
I did not mention if it was the same organization for trauma therapy and DNA. Those, I believe, were different organizations.
Okay, good to know. And so we do wonder too, like, what would be some appropriate goals for this case and next steps that would be helpful for collaboration or for the client? I'm gonna put that in the chat now.
I see the point made, it takes a village to raise a healthy child equals healthy, safer community. I love that. And yeah, just acknowledging the number of people that are in a child's life and how we can include all the different supports in order to create a healthier situation, a healthier environment.
And with this next question, Jody, I'm wondering what you're thinking. You can share your thoughts with the group. When you say what goals are next and steps are next, do you mean like now that he's re-referred, what can we do this time? Is that what you're thinking?
So it almost kind of seems like we're back at this cycle, right? Where he's now engaged in another behavior, back on probation again. What can be done differently this round, whether that's more collaboration of, problem solving with the family. How can we think about this in the context of trauma-informed collaboration to hopefully have a better outcome during the next 2-3 months? I see more systems need to be more trained and educated on the effects of trauma. I agree. I think that's something that's universal and helpful in order to serve youth and clients who are experiencing that and interacting with many different symptoms that are not always having that education and training. I love this, Lucy. It seems that as soon as supports ended, he went back on probation, not saying, yay, you did it, and then ending services, but continuity of care. Yes, definitely. We talked about like those treatment gaps, about lack of dropping out of engagement in service earlier. How can we avoid that by kind of having continued engagement or making sure he's involved in other supports if he's maybe completed this requirement? That's great. Create and assign a case manager who is responsible for bringing the team together for collaborative briefings, goal setting, and accountability. Yes, I love that. I will say that while there was different collaboration and communication going on, there wasn't a holistic approach of everyone coming together to talk about this case with all the people at the table. And I do think that that is a great point for next steps and goals moving forward.
Yeah, and that brings us to our next kind of set of questions. I'm going to put a bunch in there because they're all related to each other. Marielle says here, finding a way that all providers are aware of his goals. Perhaps he allows the case manager to share that, or he's encouraged to share that with individual providers, right? So like that's a huge part of bringing everybody on the same page. If like everybody that's working with this client knows what the goals are that are identified by the client, right? Because we want to include them as much as possible to ensure buy-in. So like this time around, having the client identify their goals and then making sure that everybody involved has a copy of that and is talking about that if possible. These are, going towards our next set of questions, which is great. I want to also go back to Gerald's statement, assigning case manager responsible for bringing the team together. In Jody and I's work so many times, and I think everyone here as well, we become the quarterback of services, right, for one person. And excuse me for the sports analogy or cliche, but we are the orchestrator, we are the orchestra conductor of all these different people and services. And that job can get hard. And I think that's where, that's why we're here, because that's how we experience all the difficulties with collaboration. But being that quarterback, everybody needs one, especially when there's multiple services involved. So stepping up to the plate and saying, I'm going to call an interagency meeting for the sake of this client because I don't want him back in the system. I'm going to add some more here. A big nod of agreement from Gerald, definitely. Every chef has multiple sous chefs. I love it. If you don't want to use a sports analogy, these are really good as well. I think that these kind of drive home the point that like someone should take the lead, and if we see that it's not happening, then it could be us, or we could tap another person. Like, hey, I really think that you have the skills and you have the access to get this treatment team together. Would you be willing to set up an appointment? Or would you be willing to set up an interagency meeting? So here we have how would this team this time around focus efforts or divide their goals? What are important considerations in this case this time around? And what barriers need to be addressed? What does success look like for this kid or this client? What are we thinking about this? Like ever since I saw what most of the room does, I keep thinking about what does this look like in a DV perspective, honestly, because I'm imagining, I don't know, I've worked with that client, but I don't know it as much as you guys, this client base, but I would imagine that there's a lot of work to be done in ensuring the safety of our clients that have experienced domestic violence. And sometimes they can fall into extremely detrimental patterns, whether that's finding a new partner to move in with, where it presents another unsafe situation, or falling back into old family or intimate partner patterns. So what are you guys thinking as far as your own perspective on how we might just kind of refocus after the cycle has repeated itself for our clients, or there might have been some quote unquote self-sabotaging behaviors that we know to be trauma? This is the last little bit of this discussion, so I want to allow time for people to chime in on their own experience. Getting back to the drawing board, addressing barriers. Yeah. Yeah, what caused this? What caused this lapse, right? Like, what caused this kid to fall back in the cycle? Did he have a trauma trigger, right? Did he have an encounter with a person that could have been a perpetrator? And it's interesting you say, ask ourselves that question and then ask our clients. We really harp on, oh, Erica's contributing, I want to get to her. We really harp on trauma screening and how important it is to know what the trauma background is as soon as we can. And that has, I think we've, as a whole community, gotten so much better at trauma screening. And it's a huge part of trauma-informed care. But sometimes we forget about the trauma rescreening. What is going on this week? I've just noticed that something has happened. Like, were you re-traumatized? Have you had any reminders or triggers lately? Sometimes we don't do those follow-ups. So that's a really good point, Lucy. I appreciate that. Erica chimes in with what is his definition of success. So important, client-centered care. Forcing a 15-year-old to buy into someone else's version of success for him is a very difficult thing to accomplish. I agree. And how can we help build up his definition of success? So maybe his definition of success is, I want all these adults off my back. Great. I love that goal. How can we do that? We can do that by attending appointments and stabilizing your behavior across multiple settings. So how do you think you can do that? Do you think that, like, just, I would probably wouldn't suggest this, but like, is running away the only way? Oh, there's other ways. Let's hear about those as well. Attending appointments, meeting your criteria to the point where you feel comfortable enough to try and do some of this stuff independently, hopefully with some supports. I really love his definition. Thank you, Eric. Much appreciated. Okay, so I think I really appreciate all the feedback we've gotten. I think, in the chat, we've gotten a great discussion going. And Gerald says, collaboration is the key. Knowing and trusting a network of providers. Our clients inherit many of our trusts and distrusts, and they believe that we don't trust the other professionals that we're collaborating with, or they're referring that we'll never trust them, right? So like he's hitting on a great point, is that like we don't trust each other. Like our clients don't always know that, like, what trust is. That's so true. We develop trust by doing things like we are right now, talking, brainstorming, interacting. I love that as well. I think you're right. Like, if we don't trust that case manager is going to do their job, they won't either. And if we don't follow up with that case manager, then they won't either. All of these things are very true. Much appreciated.
Yeah, and that circles back to, the conversations that we have with each other, the conversations we have about each other with our clients in order to, again, build those relationships, build those trusts, and create that team setting in order to tackle the problems at hand.
Great. And so I'm really impressed by the depth of conversation that we're able to get through just a chat.
Yes.
So let's keep that up. I'm really appreciative and impressed by that. I'm okay with pauses. I'm a therapist, so I can wait all day, and I'm glad that people are utilizing that time, that pause, to kind of contribute. We're seeing here, as advocates, we witness time and time again self-sabotaging and repeated destructive behavior. So true, Letty. We rely highly in the expertise from mental health professionals such as yourselves who specialize on working with trauma survivors, and we trust that can help clients out. Yeah, and I appreciate that, Letty. And I think that, when we come into people such as yourself, it's like a breath of fresh air for us to see someone on our same page and someone who wants the same thing, which is trauma recovery. And they're going about it in a different way, and they have their own set of skills and expertise. So we're glad to hear that. It makes our job as trauma therapists much easier and better. I love it.
Yeah, and there's one more comment about, if you have a team member that doesn't deserve your trust, they need to be held to account. So I think there are ways that we can help hold each other accountable to meet the needs of the clients that we're working with, and to repair those relationships and build trust.
Absolutely. I think we can get into that maybe at the end as well, like how we, when all of our efforts and all of our strategies don't work, how do we hold people accountable? All right. So
one just quick thing, sorry, you can go to the next slide, Doug, but just kind of taking a minute to show an example. We found this template that kind of outlines a lot of the things that we talked about of when working with various providers in a team setting. You don't necessarily need to bring a form to a meeting, but this is just an example of ways that you can kind of organize thoughts in order to create goals and expectations when you're in an interagency setting in order to have that team mentality working together to meet the needs of a family.
Yeah, one thing I want to bring up, one thing I want to bring up here is, I don't know if this applies to everybody. Has anyone ever been in an interagency team meeting? This is just a yes or no in the chat, where everybody like signs their name and they pass a paper around, like, we were here, this is who participated in this meeting, like a little sign-in sheet. Has anyone ever done that where they write their credentials and like their agency, maybe their phone number? It's just a sign-in sheet with like people's names and signatures. Have you ever done that, Jody?
Yes.
Yes, you have. Okay, I'm hearing yes.
We're getting lots of yeses.
A lot of people. Right, so one thing that I started to do on that sheet is I started to write, what is your role in helping this client? Right next to their name and phone number, right? And I made those lines a little bigger, but it made people think. It's like, my job is to stabilize their behavior in the classroom, or my job is to make sure that like they get access to housing eventually, right? So like, I love just, if we ever had a sign-in sheet, we could make that sign-in sheet have one extra prompt, and that prompt is, how will you help this client? What is your plan to help this client in the next month until we meet again, right? So that could just be a couple bullets for people. People might be defensive or don't want to fill that out. I'm not sure. Maybe we can word it in a way that's tactful enough, but I've actually done that in a several, yeah, why am I here? That's beautiful. This is my name, this is my organization, and this is why I'm here today, right? Because this is my role in the client. This is better accountability, like we talked about earlier. So this is like an example of a template that can get people thinking about that in the meetings that we have. It's not always just to catch up, check something off the box. It's like really teaming and figuring out what will each of us do and how can we all work together to best serve this client. So those are some simple solutions I have. It's funny, that form, like I said, sometimes there'll be a defensive, there was some defensive responses, but mostly it was great responses, and I feel like it really increased buy-in of the whole team.
Yep.
So appreciate that.
We're going to, as we move towards kind of our summary and wrap up, we so appreciate everyone chiming in on their own experience, their own input, and want to kind of come away with this conversation with an action step. As we've sort of mentioned, at times we're all doing a million things. We're stressed out by the work, by things, everything going on in our professional and personal lives. But as kind of mentioned, the goal is that trauma-informed collaboration can help make the work easier, right? It's not just something to add to the to-do list. It's a way to come together to have that team setting so that we're dividing work. We are using different perspectives. We are getting more information that can help make our work easier and reducing stress on ourselves and those that we're working with. So from our conversation today, from the things we talked about, from the things you all talked about in the chat, what is one thing you're going to take away that you can kind of implement into your work or think about moving forward? So if you want to do a quick in the chat, one takeaway that you want to think about further or implement into things you do.
Yeah, Monica says asking people about their bandwidth. We're not superheroes. We can't do it all, even though sometimes we think we do. If we think about the way we act, we can transmit that to our clients, often unknowingly. Mm-hmm. Supporting one another through collaboration equals better outcomes for clients. I appreciate that.
And we've got the charter form encouraging individual buy-in of the team. That's great. The question of why am I here? To remain focused on the fact we are not alone and we can always continue to collaborate with other agencies and ask for their expertise. Love that.
I really like what you said there, asking for another agency's expertise, right? Because that kind of like, I mean, it's a little bit of a Jedi mind trick of like saying like, oh, you're so good at this. I really need your help. Kind of like a compliment sandwich, which we don't always have time to do if we're running out of patience. But you know, I really need your trauma expertise here. I'm in desperate need of your help. Can you help me out? I think people would be more willing to respond to that email if they were maybe buttered up a little bit or you felt like you really needed them. So I appreciate that. Relying on others' expertise and letting them know that too. Compliment sandwich. Yeah, a supervisor told me that. You're doing a great job of doing this. I would really love if you can return my phone calls. But again, thanks so much for your help today. You look great. Whatever it might be. Believe the best of collaborators. I like that. Don't take their opinions of clients. Ask a lot of questions. Thank you, Lucy.
Yeah, we feel very honored and privileged when others reach out to us for ours. Yeah, I've also started the practice of modeling like how to reach out. So when I do end up talking to people, I ask like, is phone the best way to reach you? Is email the best way to reach you? Is setting up a meeting the best way to reach you, to model so they can, so I know if I'm sending a million emails and they're not responding to me, it's because maybe a phone call is easier, that they'll be able to get to me right away. And doing that vice versa to be able to make sure you're being set up for success in order to collaborate.
Oh, I love that question. That's like a great way to end an email, Marielle. How can I best support your process in this collaboration? You know what I mean? It really like is a great way to say, what will you bring to the table? You know what I mean? I'm gonna like copy and paste that. This is good. I could see myself using that, saying, kind regards, Doug, at the end of an email. Ooh, sorry. Of course, Monica, thank you. It is very hard work, and we feel energized talking to this group today. I hope that you guys feel the same energy of people in the room that experience what you're going through and the difficulties that we're having. But I'm really, you are not alone. Thank you, Gerald. I hope that we feel a sense of community, even through this chat, even through this presentation today. Letty says, one of my personal responses, I don't have an answer for your question, but I just happen to know who to reach out to for the right answer. Beautiful, beautiful. That's definitely lifting a communication barrier and a collaboration barrier just by responding that way. Okay, well, thank you all so much for attending. I'm going to send thanks for Jody as well. This was a great experience for us, and I hope it was for you guys as well. We're going to hang out a little bit. If anybody has any questions, feel free to put it in the chat. Yeah, you want to add anything to that, Jody?
No, thank you everyone for your collaboration here in the chat and chiming in with all your important input and conversation topics. So we really appreciate everyone being here, and yeah, we'll stick around if there's any questions.
Shout out Letty, Marielle. Shout out Gerald, you were awesome. Thank you, Monica. Much appreciated. Ashley as well. Earl Dean, great contributions. Lucy, of course. Thank you all. Jamila as well. Beautiful.
Sorry, everyone. I kind of lost my audio for a second, so I couldn't hear that you guys were wrapping up. So I just wanted to thank everybody for being here. Thank Doug and Jody for your expertise. We greatly appreciate you guys being here. We can stick around, see if anybody has any follow-up questions. If you don't, thank you so much for being here. We really do appreciate it.
I'm seeing that there's still a few people here.
That's what I'm looking for. Trying to give people the chance if they have questions to wrap it up.
So I just want to, touch on one question that we get from this in the past, and it's like, what do you do when somebody doesn't collaborate, when you don't get a phone call back? And anybody that's still here has experienced that, I'm sure. And we all do this, but it can't be said enough for accountability when that is warranted. So if someone is neglectful of their duties to a client, sometimes it is our responsibility to make sure that those people are held accountable, because we're not doctors. We don't take an oath to do no harm, but that is all implied in our field. So when a person might be doing harm by being negligent, it is our responsibility to get a hold of their supervisor. This can be done by calling that front desk. Yeah. This can be done by calling a front desk, asking any receptionist, like, hi, I'm trying to get in touch with this person. Can you give me the phone number of their supervisor? Reaching out to other people higher up in the systems. All of those things that we can do to try and get the service that we need for our clients. Thank you for your input there. I much appreciate it.
All right, I am not seeing any questions, so I am going to go ahead and end the session for everybody.
Of course.
Again, thank you guys so much. We greatly appreciate it.
Yep. Oh, read receipt on our accountability emails encourages accountability. I like that too, Joe. All right. Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you.